Our story begins on the icy outpost of Barton 4 as the former member of the Bad Batch, Crosshair, is dragging the clone commander Mayday through the snow. The two of them chase down a group of bandits, stealing Imperial supplies, but they failed as an avalanche plowed down from the mountain, catching them both in a sudden storm. Crosshair was able to find his way out of the snow, and he dragged Mayday, who was in and out of consciousness, all the way back to base where the Imperials were waiting. On this base were Lieutenant Nolan and around 30 TK Stormtroopers, the earliest type of human conscripted soldiers for the Empire. These Stormtroopers were taking the hundreds of armor crates stored here back to Coruscant, and after a bit, some of them noticed Crosshair and Mayday stumbling their way through the snow. Lieutenant Nolan ordered the Stormtroopers to return to loading the crates, then smugly walked over to Crosshair and Mayday as Mayday fell hard to the ground, nearly dying. But Nolan offered no sympathy. As Crosshair was nearly begging for a medic to help Mayday, Nolan only said that the two of them failed to return with any crates, and helping Mayday would be a waste of the Empire's resources. But nearby, behind Nolan, one of the Stormtroopers never returned to work. This was a human from Coruscant named Gus, and his life was saved by the clones during the attack on Coruscant. He admired the clones, and he joined Stormtroopers to fight beside them, only to quickly learn how terribly the Empire treats its veteran soldiers. And as Gus heard Nolan lecturing the injured, dying Crosshair and Mayday, Gus began to question everything. He joined to fight with the clones, the soldiers who saved the galaxy from the Separatists, and this is how they are treated. Gus heard Mayday cough violently, and Crosshair went to feel his pulse, and Gus knew it was time to make a choice. Would he let an Imperial lieutenant do this, or would he stand up for his fellow soldier? Nolan smugly said this clone served his purpose, and Gus could only wonder what would happen if he were ever injured. What about his friends in the army? His own brother that joined? No, this was not what he was here to fight for. So Gus pulled out his blaster, and he fired at Nolan. The first shot missed, and Nolan quickly turned, but Gus fired again, shooting right through Nolan's chest. And as Nolan fell, Gus yelled at the other men to immediately get a stretcher and a medic ready. The Stormtroopers respected Gus. He was sort of their leader among this group, and so they sprang into action. One of the men, called Percy, ran over with medical supplies, and the troopers began to help Mayday, injecting him with a stim, getting back to flowing into him quickly. Nolan was coughing on the ground, and the last thing he saw was the clones and the Stormtroopers working together to save one man, and it wasn't him. Around an hour later, Mayday was finally stabilized, and Crosshair was alone with Gus. Crosshair was genuinely thanking him, and soon, Gus asked a question that was on a lot of Stormtroopers' minds. What actually happened to Kamino? The rumors were that Crosshair and the other Bad Batch members were there when the storm took it down, and Crosshair, now completely lost with the Empire, told the truth. Kamino was destroyed by order of the Emperor himself. Crosshair told Gus that he's a good man, a good soldier, and if he knows what's best, he'll stop serving the Empire, and that would be the last that Gus ever sees of Crosshair, at least for a long while, as he ultimately took responsibility for the murder of Nolan, as Crosshair wanted to see where the Empire takes its clone prisoners. In the weeks that passed, Gus would stay in the Empire, hoping Barton 4 was more of a blip on what this was all about, but every day, more clone troopers were arrested for reasons no one understood, and only Gus knew the truth about what happened on Kamino. And so Gus would begin to spread the word of the destruction of Kamino. Whispers ran through the barracks, with questioning of the Empire bubbling beneath the surface. A few of his fellow Stormtroopers had bonded with their clone instructors, had seen the discipline and courage firsthand. If the Empire could betray them so easily, the men who helped win the Clone Wars, who was to say that they wouldn't do the same to the new recruits? Gus knew he was walking a dangerous line, but word of Gus's descent reached those loyal to the clone uprising, including Senator Ryo Chuchi, one of the few senators who'd stood up for the clones. Chuchi had already been in hiding, her open defiance of the Empire's treatment of the clones, making her a target. And when Gus and his 30 most loyal men found her, she was operating in the shadows, gathering what information she could about the clones' fate. She led them deep into Coruscant's underworld, and here, Gus would meet with Rex, along with the clones still working with Rex after the Empire announced that the clones were officially being phased out. This meeting was rather tense. The clones had no real love for Stormtroopers. Many saw them as the Empire's willing enforcers, faceless replacements that had taken their place. But Gus and his men were different. They wanted to be on the right side of history, and to them, that was with the clones. They'd seen cracks in the Empire, and they weren't the only ones. Rex had begun to lose hope that anyone outside the clones could be trusted in this fight, but seeing Stormtroopers standing before him, pledging loyalty to his Uprising, it reignited something in him. It was a new purpose. In the early days of this alliance between clones and Stormtroopers didn't exactly come easily. The clones were seasoned warriors, trained literally from birth, while the Stormtroopers were still learning, and they had to be extremely secretive. There were fights, disagreements, deep-rooted distrust that took a long time to break down. But over months of working together, raiding Imperial supply lines, rescuing abandoned clones from Imperial prisons, and spreading word of this cause, they became something more than an uneasy alliance. They were almost like brothers. The Stormtroopers, who were a part of the secret uprising, would spray paint the Republic logo inside of their arm plate, hidden away, but it could be shown to others to prove their loyalty. And as this group of troopers grew, Ryo Chuchi took the fight to the people of this galaxy. She traveled to different worlds, appearing in popular marketplaces, town squares, underground holo broadcasts, and she was speaking the truth. The Empire treated its soldiers like disposable tools. She told stories of clones abandoned to starvation, of stormtroopers executed for asking questions, and she continued to tell the truth about Kamino's destruction. Her words resonated, her crowds would grow, and in some places, entire stormtrooper battalions would lay down their weapons and defect. Even citizens who'd once believed in the Empire began to see it for what it really was. The clone rebellion grew, operating in the shadows, striking where the Empire least expected. Clones and stormtroopers alike turned against their former commanders. Every day, another lieutenant would be executed as a group of soldiers would just suddenly disappear, as Rex, Echo, Gregor, Wolf were among the clones leading the group that would help make stormtroopers disappear and join their growing uprising. The Empire began to respond with brutal crackdowns, but the more they tried to silence Chuchi, the louder her voice would become. But soon, the movement would reach its most daring moment yet. Chuchi would speak out on the Empire's doorstep, Naboo, the homeworld of Palpatine himself. And the crowd in Theed's Grand Plaza was enormous. It was a sea of white armor mixed with civilians who'd come to listen to Chuchi. Her impact, her influence, was becoming very strong. Stormtroopers stood shoulder to shoulder with clones, a sight that would have been unthinkable just months ago. The uprising was still mostly peaceful, as a sort of protest against the treatment of the Imperial soldiers. But the soldiers were ready to break, ready to fight. They just needed a final push. Holocams would broadcast Chuchi's speech across the stars, her voice unwavering as she condemned Palpatine. She spoke of the clones who'd fought and died for a republic that abandoned them. She spoke of the stormtroopers who'd been fed lies. She spoke of a new hope that together they could create and build something better. This was the first speech that spoke directly to the idea of completely separating from the Empire, and it was also the final straw for the Emperor before stepping in. The sky would darken as Imperial alarms began to blare, and in Naboo Square, the Emperor's shuttle descended upon the plaza, flanked by squads of TIE fighters, and the shuttle didn't exactly land gently. It landed suddenly, crushing dozens of stormtroopers and clones beneath its weight, an unmistakable message of what was to come. The holocams all cut out as clone assassins, specifically designed to be extra loyal on Tantus before the mountain base was broken and abandoned, spread into the streets, taking out all the cams. The ramp lowered, and the red lightsaber of Darth Vader was ignited. Vader reached out, grabbing Chuchi with the Force, deflecting blaster fire of stormtroopers and clones alike, before pulling Chuchi through the air and right into Vader's blade. She died, but before she did, she yelled out at the troopers to fight the Empire, and Vader threw her to the ground before walking into this huge group of troopers, and in the end, very few would escape with their lives, as the Naboo massacre would only be seen by a few survivors, as the Empire used the loyal assassins to shut the streets down from any civilian interference. When it was over, Palpatine would speak to the galaxy, issuing a statement to say that any stormtrooper found working against the Empire will immediately be arrested, and their families will be investigated as well. Weeks later, the execution of Ryo Chuchi on Naboo was meant to be a death blow to the Uprising, a grim warning to anyone who dared oppose Palpatine in the Empire. But instead, it was like a spark that set the galaxy ablaze. It was what they were waiting for. Despite the Empire's best efforts, they were sloppy in trying to stop protests. Footage of Vader stabbing Chuchi, of stormtroopers and clones being slaughtered under the Emperor's decree, was smuggled off-world before Imperial censors could erase the truth. The galaxy watched as the Empire proved its brutality time and time again, and instead of crushing this rebellion, Palpatine had given it a martyr. In the wake of Naboo's massacre, many stormtroopers who'd once hesitated now did see the truth. Defections would truly surge. Garrisons would go silent overnight as entire squads abandoned their posts. The movement that had begun with Gus, Crosshair, and 30 loyal men turned into something unstoppable. They couldn't stay on Coruscant, of course. Imperial intelligence was hunting them relentlessly, so Rex and his clones, drawing from old war maps, chose their next battlefield carefully. They would vanish into the ocean depths of Mon Cala, a planet that was supporting any opposition to the Empire. The Stormtroopers would train under clone commanders, including Crosshair and Mayday, as they were well hidden here in the Ocean City. They were learning from soldiers who'd spent their lives fighting, and throughout the Mid and Outer Rim, Imperial outposts fell to unseen enemies. Supply convoys vanished. Loyalist Stormtroopers began questioning their orders, finding their own brothers turning against the cause they'd sworn to serve. And Gus, now a leader in the Uprising, personally led rescue missions to liberate defectors before the Empire could execute them. With each passing month, ranks of the Clone Rebellion swelled with all sorts of different troopers. The Empire still fought back viciously. Vader personally led purges against Stormtrooper defectors, but for every battalion he crushed, 2 more slipped through the Empire's cracks. The rebels here weren't exactly fighting as the Republic once had. They weren't seeking battles they couldn't win. They struck where the Empire was weakest, turning the Stormtrooper legions against themselves, breaking the chain of command one defection at a time. And after a while, in a desperate bid to stop the rebellion, the Empire would initiate Project Blackout in order to replace all remaining human stormtroopers with something far worse. The Purge Corps, a legion of genetically altered, brainwashed soldiers who knew only obedience. At this point, there weren't so many human stormtroopers where this was impossible, and these new troopers were created on Exegol from dead troopers gathered from around the galaxy. They were revived, and they were extremely loyal to the Emperor. The first wave of Purge troopers was deployed across the Mid-Rim, tasked with eliminating the rebellion at any cost. And eventually, the Mon Cala base was discovered, and a brutal siege began. Star Destroyers commanded by these Purge troopers rained fire down on the ocean planet, turbo lasers turning the once hidden stronghold into a war zone. The rebels fought with everything they had, but against overwhelming firepower, they had no choice but to evacuate. Rex led the retreat, knowing that holding Mon Cala was impossible, but its purpose had been served. The Uprising was strong enough to survive without it, and as the Purge Corps landed on the sinking remnants of Mon Cala, they found nothing but empty hulls, as the many citizens had even been evacuated in Mon Cala cruisers that would aid the growing Uprising. Meanwhile, the troopers would find refuge on Kashyyyk after weeks on the run. The Wookiees had no love for the Empire, and with the help of defected stormtroopers, the Wookiees and troopers struck back against the Imperial slavers, freeing thousands. In return, the Wookiees offered sanctuary. In the dense jungles, beneath the canopies, the rebellion could rebuild. Supply lines were secured, training would intensify, stormtroopers and clones fought as one, learning from the other. Gus had become more than a defector. He was a symbol of what stormtroopers could be, not just faceless enforcers, but actual people with a purpose in this galaxy. And across the galaxy, as Chuchi's death became a rallying cry, civilians who'd once stayed silent were rising up, emboldened by this stormtrooper uprising. On Balmorra, factory workers sabotaged Imperial weapon shipments, destroying ATSTs before they ever saw battle. On Ryloth, Twi'lek freedom fighters, long at odds with the Empire, welcomed defected stormtroopers into their ranks. The uprising had grown its original cause. It was no longer just about stormtroopers and clones. It was about the countless billions who'd suffered under Imperial rule. And among the uprising, new legends were born. One was Sergeant Lauren Vex, a stormtrooper who'd once led a purge against Jedi survivors, only to later realize the horror of what he had done. Now, he fought to redeem himself, leading dangerous missions to free political prisoners from Imperial labor camps. Another was Juno Rask, a former Imperial sharpshooter who had defected after watching Vader execute her entire squad for a minor failure. She became the Uprising's deadliest sniper, next to Crosshair, of course, covering her brothers from the treetops of Kashyyyk. There was also Kilo Bran, a demolitions expert who'd once built the very bombs the Empire used to crush the Uprising. Now, he turned his knowledge against them, crafting explosives that crippled Star Destroyers and shattered Imperial supply lines. One of the Uprising's major strikes came on Fondor, one of the Empire's primary shipyards. Vex led a team of defected stormtroopers alongside clone Captain Fenric, a grizzled veteran of the 125th Legion. Their mission was to sabotage the docked Star Destroyers before they could reinforce the fleet, hunting the rebellion. The team infiltrated the shipyard, disguised as workers, planting charges along the reactor cores of 3 warships. When the explosives detonated, the resulting chain reaction sent wreckage plummeting into Fondor's surface, a fiery reminder that the Empire was not invincible. On Kashyyyk, the rebels gathered around the crackling hollow projectors to watch the explosions in real time, roaring in triumph as the Empire's war machine suffered a devastating blow. Another mission was even riskier, an assault on Iadu, where Imperial scientists developed new weapons for the Purge Corps. Juno Rask accompanied Clone Sergeant Helix and his squad, tasked with eliminating these key Imperial researchers before they could perfect a new energy-based riot control system meant to subdue Stormtroopers considering defection. The storm was their ally here, as Iadu's torrential rain and thick fog masked their approach. Silent kills turned into full-scale combat as alarms were blaring, but the Uprising used the terrain to their advantage, and by the time they were retreating, the facility was burning. The research data had been erased. The Purge Corps would have to fight without their latest weapons. And back on Kashyyyk, the rebels honored the mission's success with a Wookiee feast, a celebration of the warriors who made it back, and of course a remembrance of those who did not. Another of the missions was more personal. Kilo Brand led a strike on Karida, the very academy of where he had been trained to serve the Empire. With him was a squad of stormtroopers who once called it home, along with clone demolitions expert Kareen. Their goal was to destroy the academy's advanced training simulations, programs designed to make new stormtroopers more obedient and ruthless. They infiltrated the base under the cover of night, sneaking past security members and elite Imperial officers. The charges would be set, but before they could detonate, reinforcements arrived. Inquisitors had been dispatched to protect this facility. The battle was brutal. It was fought in the halls where the stormtroopers once pledged their allegiance. Kilo and Kareen made the call. They would stay behind and detonate these charges manually. The others barely escaped as the entire academy erupted into flames, taking 3 Inquisitors and the Imperial officers down with it. On Kashyyyk, their sacrifices were legendary, actions inspiring even more defectors to take the risk. The Empire was bleeding, and the rebels had no intention of stopping. But they also knew it was only a matter of time until Vader found them, or the Empire created another batch of lethal troopers. So the grand plan would be decided upon. They would strike Coruscant. And the battle for Coruscant was never meant to be a simple strike. It was an upheaval, a declaration that the Empire's days were truly numbered. The Clone and Stormtrooper Rebellion, united under a single banner, had chosen a new name, Liberation Troopers, a name that signified their purpose. Not exactly conquest, revenge, but it was a fight for true freedom. Clones and former Stormtroopers stood side by side, white armor repainted with deep blue stripes, a symbol of their unity. And the plan was ambitious, and hopefully exactly what the Empire would not expect. As the Rebel fleet soon emerged from hyperspace, alarms across Coruscant would begin to go off, and the Imperial Navy, numbering dozens of Star Destroyers above Coruscant, turned to intercept the attack. But the Empire had been rotting from the inside. As the first shots were fired, 10 Star Destroyers suddenly changed course, turning their turbo lasers against their supposed allies. Over many months, the Uprising had planted troopers in the Coruscant defense fleet, knowing this day was coming, and these ships, crewed by officers, pilots, stormtroopers who'd been waiting for the right moment, joined the rebellion, blasting apart the Imperial formation from within. The chaos was instant. The Empire's fleet found itself splintered, fighters swarmed between warships, TIE pilots scrambled as defected interceptors turned on them. Liberation troopers flooded onto dropships, preparing for the second phase of the assault. But the Empire was not done yet. Darth Vader's personal Star Destroyer surged forward. The massive vessel carved through the chaos, its overwhelming firepower tearing through defected Star Destroyers. Vader had arrived, and he had only one objective: eradicate this uprising once and for all. And so boarding teams, one that was assembled of the uprising's greatest soldiers, would be assembled. Former Stormtroopers Lauren Vex, Juno Rask, and Clone Captain Fenric and Clone Sergeant Helix were led by Rex and Gus as they led a strike force directly onto Vader's ship. Their own cruisers provided cover fire as they flew over Vader's ship, and soon the drop bay opened, and the boarding team leapt from the ship, along with a couple other boarding teams, mag boots locking onto the hull from space, as explosives tore through the airlock and the Liberation troopers flooded inside. Inside of the Star Destroyer, the fight would be intense. Elite Purge Corps troopers fought to the last man as Liberation troopers filled the halls. These halls became extreme danger zones, blaster bolts bouncing off the walls as clones and stormtroopers fought shoulder to shoulder, pushing deeper into the ship. Vex and Fenric led a charge through the reactor core, planting thermal charges that would cripple the vessel. They would evacuate as they go off. Rask, the sniper, took position on a higher catwalk, picking off Imperial officers before they could call for reinforcements. But then Vader arrived, red blade ignited, cutting through the ranks of these troopers, and with a flick of his hand, soldiers were hurled into walls, crushed by the power of the Force. Vex barely dodged a swipe of the lightsaber, his men cut down in an instant, but the troopers did not give up yet. Vader was powerful, but he was only one man. Rex, Fenric, and Hallex, veterans of the Clone Wars, adapted instantly. Thermal detonators were ignited, not at Vader himself, but at the walls around him. Explosions forced the Dark Lord back, forcing him into a tight corner, where his movements were more limited. Then Juno Rask took the shot, an armor-piercing bolt that struck Vader's shoulder, searing through his armor. Gus, Vex, and his squad took their moment, opening fire with everything they had. Vader deflected the bolts, but the sheer number overwhelmed him as they pierced his chest plate. Gus closed in on the gap, using his vibroblade, slashing across Vader's respirator as Vader angrily threw Gus backwards. The Dark Lord fell to one knee, and the final blow would come from Hallex as he shot a series of blast doors behind him and Vader, locking them alone in a small hallway square. The clone showed Vader the thermal detonator, and before Vader could move to stop it, the explosion would engulf Vader and Hallex in fire, as Vader was finally defeated. But there was no time to celebrate. The ship trembled violently as Imperial reinforcements struck the Star Destroyer with everything they had. The vessel was breaking apart. The mission was not over yet. With Vex at the helm, the remaining Liberation troopers seized control of the bridge. They could not escape. The ship was too damaged, and Imperial forces were closing in. But they could send a final message. Vex turned the ship's failing engines towards Coruscant, towards the Senate building. Rex and Gus made it up to the bridge together as the broken ship descended towards the surface. Palpatine sat alone in the Senate chamber, his empire so complete that the Senate itself had become obsolete. The Star Destroyer, flames pouring from its hull, descended through Coruscant skies like a burning dagger. Liberation troopers on board held onto whatever they could as the ship roared towards the Senate building, and below, civilians, Imperial loyalists, rebels alike looked up in awe, and the impact shattered the steel walls of the Senate chamber. The roof collapsed as the Star Destroyer plowed into the structure, engulfing everything in a ginormous explosion that would spread very far out. Fire and debris consumed the heart of Coruscant. The greatest warriors of the Uprising had gone down with the ship, but the Emperor was gone as well, and the remaining forces of the Uprising would retreat with victory. And across the galaxy, from Kashyyyk to Ryloth, from Fondor to what remained on Mon Cala, celebration ensued. The 5 years that followed the fall of the Senate building were ones of rebuilding. With Palpatine's grip shattered and Vader gone, the Liberation troopers led the charge in dismantling the Imperial remnants that still held power. Across the galaxy, Stormtroopers who once followed Imperial orders without question now stood alongside their clone brothers as protectors of freedom, liberating worlds still under Imperial control. Mon Mothma, stepping in as the leader of the movement that Ryo Chuchi had once begun, worked to unite the broken galaxy. The Republic was being restored. Worlds that were once fearful of Imperial retaliation openly declared their allegiance to this new democracy, forming a Senate where the voice of every system mattered. Stormtroopers and clones were the Republic's first defenders, and as the Republic flourished, the need for war diminished. Many of the former troopers found new purposes, some becoming peacekeepers, others settling on liberated worlds to help rebuild what the Empire had destroyed. The name Liberation Troopers remained, not as warriors, but as a legacy of those who had fought for something greater than themselves. The galaxy that was once torn apart by war and tyranny now stood together, stronger, and for the first time in decades, peace was a reality. And over the years, Luke Skywalker would join Obi-Wan as Jedi helping this galaxy, while Leia would find her place as one of the greatest leaders in the Senate. And folks, that is our story for today. One that I've had written down for a while, and one that when I got this thumbnail emailed to me, I was like, oh, awesome, I'm gonna make this story now. Oh yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. The part that was the most intriguing to me, I think, was kind of like giving names to a few Stormtroopers, because they really do go nameless and faceless throughout really all of Star Wars, except for, mainly Finn in the movies. So I thought that was fun, making a few storylines where you make the Stormtroopers more human, and I enjoyed that. Wanted to start it off with the Bad Batch episode. Hope you guys have all seen that. It's really good, but Yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you want to see next. And I'll see you in the next video.